All right. Well, welcome to our show. This is a Sync podcast, also known as the Visionary Voices Shaping the Future. Um, Welcome to another episode. We have a guest, um, Pamela, who is the CEO of Minerva Insight Strategies, women-owned boutique firm, redefining the proactive business-aligned government relations. For this episodes, we're gonna dive in a little bit into how builds in-house GR teams for startup, mature mature enterprises, and also blend data-driven advocacy with leadership development. So, welcome to our show, Pamela. It's good to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Donald. Look forward to the conversation.
All right, great. So, back into can you tell us briefly about, why this topic matters to you?
Sure. Obviously you had just mentioned we're here to talk about government relations, but in the span of really looking at thought leadership in government relations, and how investing in a government relations in-house function within a company or an organization really drives results and impact. And so
Right.
I can say I saw throughout my 25 plus year career that, part of my job was to demystify government relations and to really show companies and businesses when you invest at the front end, you are going to get a value-based function and a ROI.
All right. Thank you, Pamela. So in this episode, we will elaborate on these areas. We will look at demystify the shift from outsourced lobbying to internal strategy linked with government relations. We'll showcase Minerva's step-by-step talent and process framework. We'll also look into quantify impact, revenue lift, regulatory wins, faster market entry. We'll also equip our listeners with three tomorrow's ready action to start building their own government relations engine. Right. So this is just a quick, I would say like a quick pointer that I came up with, Pamela, because I recently went into a LinkedIn conference, and in that conference, LinkedIn has over a billion members worldwide. So it's the largest organization when it comes to networking in terms of like professional jobs and stuff like that. So in that group setting, we found out that there's about 74% of people that are actually looking for employment at this time, right? We have a lot of people that are not happy with their current situation. So as a CEO, Pamela, of Minerva, I just want to give us a quick highlight. If you are going to hire somebody, you have the budget and everything you need to hire somebody. What would be a critical position within your RAM that you will hire for? Let's say today.
Sure. So, like you had said, we're a small boutique firm. We're a women-owned business.
Right.
It's me and my partner, who is a former colleague that I've worked with for over 20 years. And, I think for us, because we're small, some of the things we've been doing is building around communities that can network, that can provide resource development, linking people, whether it's through LinkedIn, whether it's through separate communities. We just held an event in which we were very strategic about bringing people together who were either transitioning in their current role, maybe someone who has lost their job recently. And so we're doing a lot to build those communities to help people kind of transition at a time of a real uncertainty.
Right.
What I would say is if you look at our firm, we're still young and we're growing.
Right.
And so the hires that we would bring on would be dependent on where the business need is, right?
Sure.
So that's how I would answer that question. But what we're doing is we're doing a lot of building and bridging communities outside of, our actual or just through our business, if you will, to help folks right now in these uncertain times.
All right. Thank you for that. I appreciate that comment and feedback. So we're going to dive into the reactive trap. So with that, based on your experience, what do you think is broken? What's broken right now?
Well, in government relations, I think one of the things that we kind of have to flip the script on is how we're viewed. And so a lot of times government relations is viewed as one-dimensional. We're viewed strictly as, when you tell somebody head government relations or I work in government relations, they immediately say, "Oh, you lobby." Well, lobbying is a critical piece of government relations. It's one piece of a much larger pie, right? And so I think one of the things that, there needs to be more kind of education and information on, and it's one of the things I've done throughout my career, leading multiple different types of government relations functions, is to show all that we do, right?
Right.
So, government relations functions, we are strategic advisors, we are visionary leaders, we are stakeholder engagers, we are risk managers, we are reputational leaders, we're opportunity makers. I could go on and on. But we're in lobbying is one piece of that. And so I think it's really important. The more companies and organizations really understand all that government relations can do and should do for them, they'll have a much better understanding of why they should invest early on in that function.
All right. Thank you. So with that same area of impact. So what do you think it's let's say one painful story that you have seen leading the government relation function?
Sure. It's interesting. I've been doing this a long time. So I think I've seen a lot of pain points within companies and organizations around government relations. One of the things I've done throughout my career is build, scale, and sustain government relations functions.
Right.
So I really have insight into kind of what makes a successful government relations function. Some of the pain points I see can be anything from maybe it's staffing, right? Maybe it's not the right government relations expertise at the table. Maybe it's not the right industry expertise that needs to be there, right? Or the staffing really isn't tied to the business needs, right? It could be that. I've seen things like maybe government relations is not integrated throughout the company in terms of lots of companies and organizations have internal committees where they're looking at specific aspects of maybe they're looking at growth, maybe they're looking at risk, whatever it is. And I've seen where government relations isn't even included in those committees initially. And what people see is when they're on those committees, they do most of the work on those committees. They're responsible for most of the work. But the biggest pain point I probably would see, and I know we'll get into this, and you'll see this as a theme through everything I talk about in terms of successful government relations functions,
Okay.
is when a government relations function is siloed within an organization or company. That is the biggest pain point because, I have seen where government relations, when they are integrated throughout the company or an organization, they have the biggest impact, right, for a company or organization. Maybe it's revenue impact, it's leveraging opportunities, it's managing risk, whatever it is. And when they're siloed and they're not integrated through the work and the strategies of a business, you are not going to see an ROI that you would normally get when they're fully integrated.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for that question, for that answer. So in the do you believe there is any heat? Do you believe there are hidden costs of outsourcing everything in this terrain where most companies want to outsource? How do you feel about outsourcing everything?
Sure. The short answer is yes. I do believe there's hidden costs. I would say first and foremost, though, when you talk about outsourcing government relations. I don't think that that is, I would never say that's a negative thing or a bad thing for a government relations in-house function or a company or organization when they're looking at their work. I think I've had multiple government relations consultants, lobbyists, firms report to me throughout my career. There's multiple reasons why you do that, right? You do that because maybe you're a small government relations team and you need an expansion of staff and resource support. Maybe you do it because, you know, um, it depends on the portfolio you lead. So, maybe I've run global government relations where you are managing an international portfolio, a federal portfolio, and we're in all 50 states. You don't have enough staff to ever be that big, right? And so you need to make sure you have your eyes and ears on the ground. So, and there's lots of reasons why you outsource, and I think it usually benefits. When you find the right firms, it benefits a company or organization. What I would say the hidden costs are when you only outsource. So when you have no in-house government relations staff or function and leadership, and you strictly outsource to a external firm.
Okay.
And the hidden costs you're going to see are when you don't have in-house government relations leadership, you don't have any eyes and ears within your company. You have no expertise integrated throughout your company, right? You have no reporting structure where you are showing your value and what you're doing and what the ROI is to everyone from departments to, the CEO to the C-suite to the board, right? And so, in-house when you have an in-house government relations function, you really have that expertise and leadership that drives the strategy, right? That then brings about measurable outcomes. And so I always say to companies and organizations that I've worked in and worked and partnered with over the years, when they say what they want to outsource all of government relations, I say to them, who will then lead, direct, and hold accountable the consultants that you're working with? And I've never gotten an answer because they don't, no one. You have to have a government relations structure, in my opinion, to lead and provide that type of direction and accountability to any kind of external consultant or vendor that you work with.
Great, great. So I'm trying to figure out so government relations in a firm or company, would you say it would consist of a team or department or an individual? It would depend on the type of business, right? And the structure that they have.
Correct. So, we've worked with, at Minerva, we worked with, startups, scrappy startups, right? Worked with mid caps, worked with nonprofits, small and large. And so your government relations function should be directly hired and utilized dependent on your business needs, right?
Okay.
So, if you are a multi-billion dollar global company, and you have interests all around the globe, that's a big portfolio, right? You're
Right.
you're managing a lot of things. Or say you're working at a company with a lot of risk, right? So you're going to really want to focus in and hone in on your regulatory staff there, right?
Right.
Or you're a small nonprofit. What I would say to you, Donald, I think the thing that I've noticed that people mistake is, when they hire, when I've watched companies and organizations hire a head of government relations,
Mhm.
they tend to hire for the now and not for the future.
Okay.
And that's a real mistake, right? Because what you're going to find is that your company or your organization might change in 3 years. There are so many external factors that change the market, that change membership needs, whatever it is, right? And so you really need to, I think, when you look at that, be very strategic. I think the key is not how many people you have, how strategic you are about the hires that you make.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Before we dive into building the engine of, I would say, GR and government relations, a recent I was I witnessed a recent matter I would say matter dispute with the country Nigeria, and there is this insight about the Nigerian government suing Meta for $290 million, and Meta is like, well, we'll pull out of Nigeria. We would not operate there, but Nigeria has 350 to 350 million people or so. So it's a huge meta market. But what would you say GR or government relations may have played a role in that piece? How do you think that that ties into government relations?
Okay, I don't know the situation that you're referring to.
Sure.
So if I know more about it, I can specifically talk about, are you looking at how can government relations be a strategic partner in that situation? Or I'm not quite sure about that situation in order for me to give you advice on it.
Okay, okay, sure. So with that situation, that was just to highlight in showing that how big companies are still facing GR issues or relations with global government specific areas in terms of whether it could be lobbying or compliance or nature or those type of things. Because I know when we talk about GR, a huge piece is the compliance factor. So there
Correct.
is something broken that led to that accusation of Meta and their privacy with the country Nigeria and its influence and how things or business is supposed to be run or ran. So
Understood. Yeah. I
right,
mean, what I can say to that, I mean, I don't, like I said, I don't know that specific
sure,
case or situation. I can't speak to that. But what I
right,
can say is to your point about government relations role, I mean, so much of our role is to be ethical leaders, to be integral and strategic leaders,
right,
and to intervene, if you will, or influence policy and also deal with when we talk about regulations, a lot of the things that government relations address are unintended consequences, right?
right,
There's a
right,
lot of stuff that goes on, whether a piece of legislation gets written or a regulation is trying to be implemented, and part of that public comment, asking for public comments, is for folks in government relations to reach out and say, okay, this is actually the unintended consequences of this regulation. This is how it will impact our membership. This is how it will impact, our industry or whatever it is. So that's part of obviously a big part of what we do in our role. And obviously some people work with foreign governments in that space, but
right, right. And the reason why I asked that was it was leading to my next area, which is diving into Minerva's expertise. So, when we say Minerva and its government relations, how do you build your talent playbook? Are you strictly U.S. focused, helping almost every state interact? But how will that blueprint and talent or that playbook look like when it comes to the Minerva approach of GR?
sure. So, Minerva, yes, we are US based and we work at the federal and state level.
Right,
We in terms of how we kind of move forward with our clients and our partners, we work with them to build strategies and teams around what they're trying to do, right? So, for us, kind of our playbook falls into two categories. It's both proactive, I would say it's both proactive and it's strategic. The proactive part is what most people skip over. And this is the part where I'm talking about in terms of looking at government relations and investing in the hiring. of a government relations head who really can come in and know how to do this, right? Because it takes a certain knowledge and skill set to do this proactive part. So you're going to want to come in, you're going to want to do things like assessment. Right? You're going to
Okay.
want to come in. You need to learn the business. You need to learn the organization. You need to learn their goals and objectives. You need to learn what are their major challenges right now. What risks do they have now? Are there going to be risks that they see coming down the pike in 3 to 5 years? Is their strategic plan going to change in 3 years, right? Are they going through are they going to go through an acquisition, right? There's so many things that you really have to know about when you come in and really do that assessment before you go ahead and start influencing policy. You can't influence policy if you don't know what's going on, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so that's the assessment part. The other part that I think a lot of people don't kind of skip over is the buy-in, right? I call it the bus tour. When anytime I start at a new company or organization, I go on the bus tour, right? I
Okay.
go around, I speak to departments, I speak to executives, I speak to the CEO, sometimes it's the board. And you're not just talking about what government relations does and what we can do for the individuals we're meeting with. You're listening to them. You're listening to what they have on their plate. What challenges do they have going on? Where there's synergies that we can work together on, right? And so there needs to be that kind of buy-in. And once you kind of build that trust and go on that bus tour, you're going to get that. There needs to be integration. I've talked so much about that. I told you that's my theme. GR needs to be integrated. We need to touch everything within a company or organization. And when we're not touching it, they know it and they end up coming to GR. So it's really, the integration is really important. And then I think the advocacy part is really important for government relations. Again, this is proactive. Reporting structure matters. Having a GR head sit within senior leadership, reporting into the CEO, reporting into the board, that is the person who is going to talk about how government relations is not a cost center, it's a value add. Right? And here is your return on your investment. Every time we're taking action, here's what the result is for the company, right? Those are the people that are going to be able to communicate that. That's the whole big proactive budget or proactive bucket that a lot of people skip. Um, and then there's a strategic bucket, right? And it's all the things, I know we'll talk about in more detail. You want to, create a policy agenda that aligns with the business strategic plan, right? Because part of what we do is execute their strategic plan, but at a policy level, right? You want to make sure your strategies are integrated. You don't want to make sure that GR is over here doing one thing and the business is doing something else, right? You want to then move into those KPIs, right? So you want to track outputs, results only. You want to assess outcomes. You want to be able to assess regularly and you want to be able to pivot, right? And then the metrics can have a whole bunch of things in them, right? You can look at things like legislative wins. If you're doing a campaign, maybe you want to look at your media presence. You can look at things like stakeholder engagement, like what are the coalitions that you've built or that you're working with? What outcomes do you have for your industry out of that coalition work? There's a whole host of metrics and KPIs. But again, it's just really important. I've never seen a government relations function be able to really advocate for their value and ROI if they are not doing the proactive part first and then the strategy part next. And they go hand in hand.
All right. So how would you, what are your recommendation in terms of, let's say, measuring the impact? Example of maybe, you know, I mean, based on your statement, I don't know what dashboard Minerva would recommend, or would be just based on, I guess, based on the state or the federal or the agency that they're working with.
I think no, dashboards are important. I'm glad you brought that up, Donald, because every GR function should, and most that I've worked with, have dashboards. It just depends on ensuring that you have you're measuring the right information, right?
Okay.
The right impact. So dashboards should include things like legislative and regulatory tracking, right? So there's an enormous amount of incoming that government relations people take on. It's 24/7. There's thousands of bills that we have to, and that I'm just talking at the federal level. I'm not even talking at the state level, or
Okay.
if you're working with multiple countries, right? You are constantly look tracking what is out there legislatively or regulatory that impacts your company or organization, right? And there's platforms that you can use
Okay.
to track all that information, right? I've worked with lots of different kinds, and they're all really, really great. You need to have things in a dashboard like snapshots. You need to understand what the trends are, right? What the risks are, and you need to constantly be monitoring that. You need to all the KPIs that I talked about. You know, how many legislative wins have you had? Losses, um, social media mentions, whatever it is that you're specifically tracking, right? I think it's important to have assessments on your dashboard of strategic alignment. Is your business strategy aligned with your policy strategy? And if not, what tweaks do you need to make that more in alignment, right? And that should be monitored. And then I think just like I talked about, all the stakeholder engagements, right? Might be grassroots engagements that are going on, right? It might be, like I said, coalition outcomes. It could be what's your CEO doing? How are you positioning your CEO and what kind of outcomes do they have from their engagement? So there's a huge kind of dashboard, and then it's communicated in different ways, right? Government relations is taking an insane amount of incoming information and we're whittling it down, right?
Right.
Partly for us to have make informed decisions and to move quickly. But when you communicate like that, something like that to your CEO or to your board, it's going to be in like a paragraph or it's going to be in a one page, very digestible, something that they can read and ask questions very quickly.
Right. Can you share on an example of any regulatory win or market share boost that you have experienced in your line of work with GR itself?
Sure. I think we've had lots of success on the regulatory space. I think a lot of the work I've done around that has been more what I mentioned, Donald, about um, unintended consequences, right?
Right. Right.
So there was, you might have heard of it. It's been around. It's honestly been around forever. I was leading government relations at a nonprofit at the time when this regulation came out called gainful employment. And
Okay.
the idea of it, right, was that holding, I think at the time it was holding for-profit schools accountable for their graduating students being gainfully employed, right?
Okay.
Which is, on its face, yes, that makes sense, right? You want your graduates to be gainfully employed, and you want
There's
to have a workforce, right?
there's a lot of
People
that going on.
Right, right, right. So this came out decades ago. It's
Right.
still around, but this came out a long time ago. And so when it first came out, I read the regulation and I realized at the time I was at a trade association representing medical schools, so the administration, the faculty, the students. And what I realized is they were putting medical students in the category of being gainfully employed after they graduate medical school. Well, if you know anything about how to become a physician, when you are a student doctor that we say, right, when you graduate medical school, you're not gainfully employed. You have to go through 3 to 9 years of medical residency training
Right.
in order to become a certified physician, right? And
Right.
so they were kind of lumped in there. And the reality is it took us in a coalition attempt. We went forward and we had a conversation with the Department of Education, and they understood that that wasn't their intent. And sometimes it's just, regulations have a one size fits all approach
Okay.
to solving a lot of very complex problems.
Right.
And so that's one where we were able to, really partner up with the Department of Education and others and have that conversation, and it was successful.
All right. So, based on your experience, what do you also think are the early indicators for policy shifts? Sometimes companies have policies. So based on your experience, when do you think that should happen?
Are you talking external policy shifts and when we need to be ready for that?
Yes.
Yeah. So there, I think a huge one is an election. I can tell you that government relations folks are paying a lot of attention to any time there is going to be an election and a possible shift in an administration, right?
Okay.
Because that shifts everything. It
Right.
shifts the it could shift the policies depending on the party. It could shift the policies that are going to be introduced. It could shift the policies that are already there that they might want to change. It could shift compliance around regulations. It could shift, um, it could have an impact really on, whether maybe it's a federal election, right, that we're speaking about. That really could have trickle down impacts at the state as well. And the
Right.
state sometimes elections have an impact on state policy that sometimes boils up to the federal level.
Right.
So it's really a kind of a complex process, but that's the first one that comes to mind because that changes everything. It changes who's in leadership in on congressional committees, right? Who's in leadership at federal agencies, and what the policy agendas are. So I think, you know, government relations, I always say that government relations people live in the gray, right? I mean, we
Right.
just live, we are prepared, we're strategic, but we also are very used to our jobs kind of never done, right? We're just used to kind of living in that gray area and that unknown and being strategic and pivoting when we need to.
All right. Right. As we are concluding things here, what would you say are the biggest myth about advocacy?
Yeah, I would say the biggest myth, I go back to the initial conversation we had about kind of what's broken.
Right.
And I think the biggest myth about advocacy is that GR is government relations, just lobbies. I think that's the biggest myth, right? Is
Right.
that we're so much more than lobbying. That people kind of lump us into that space, and it is a big part of what we do, but we do so much more.
Right. 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 Thank you for that. So with Minerva right now, what would you say are your strategic intentions for 25, 26? How are you pivoting into the market of the US based market as we speak, and how can our audience, because most of the people that we have on the show are presidents and CEOs, so how can they utilize your services as well?
Sure. I think, we provide different types of services. So obviously one is government relations.
Okay.
So we do provide lobbying services in the US at the federal and state level. So if they're looking to have impact in that space, we are very nuanced and strategic leaders that can work with, CEOs and presidents in that space. I would say the other side of it is so much of what we talked about today is kind of this business strategy piece.
Okay.
And that's really where, if you are looking to, and like I said, you can be a startup, you can be a larger corporation, you could be a nonprofit. But if you are looking to either build and scale and kind of find that right talent and execute on strategies, um, we can help, we can be a strategic partner and help you do that. All those things that I talked about, the proactive bucket, the strategic bucket, we do all of that with our partners. And sometimes we can work with a company or organization that has a government relations function that needs, more support, needs more
Okay.
resources, and so we can come in and we can, more strategies about, being a value add and not a cost center, right? We can come in and really help the functions and partner with those GR functions and with their leadership around how to make those successful. Because in the end, Minerva is all about not just making, helping companies and organizations be successful in the government relations space. We're about bettering the government relations profession.
Okay. Okay, great. As a CEO myself or startup, well, I'm in the startup phase as well. So, one of the things that you will hear a lot of from us is we want to get a seat on the table. We want to have these great, good, profitable federal state contracts. We know that bidding is not it's not the only it's the I would say it's the general way, but we know that relationships is what gets you the work, right? Once you're known and once people understand who you are and what you're about and they can trust you. So that is that a role that like somebody like myself can contact Minerva and say, I need some kind of partnership to strengthen my federal space, or the federal part of my business or the state part of my business. Do you think that's something we can collaborate on, specifically if that's a goal of mine?
Correct. I mean, that's a big part of what we do, right?
Great.
It's reputation building, it's stakeholder engagement, it's getting folks at the table,
Sure.
right? And making sure, I mean, and the point is that you want to be at the table because you have a certain level of expertise
Right.
that you can provide.
Right.
Maybe sometimes a level of expertise that no one else at that table has. And
Okay.
so much of what we do is being very strategic about, you know, partnering with clients to ensure that not only are they at the table, but they're at the right tables.
Okay, okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. I just want to make sure I
Yeah.
give the example using myself because a lot of our people, folks that I interact with, have that intention, and I just want to make sure I use myself as an example so we can increase the footprint of startups and small business owners pivoting in the right way or in terms of pursuing these federal and
Yeah, it
state
was a great question, Donald,
contracts.
because when you're a startup, you have so many things that you're dealing with.
Right.
In government relations, sometimes you just don't even know where to start. Most people don't even know where to start. And so we give them a starting point and then give them that kind of work with them to create that kind of strategy around that. So you can have that, utilize your expertise to have that kind of influence.
All right, awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation. I want to keep going, but I know we
Me
have a scheduled
too.
time. So, is there any last word for our audience? How can they find you and how can we engage in more interaction with Minerva?
Sure. Thanks so much for that. So we have a business website. It's www.minervaoutcomes.com.
Okay.
And you can contact us on there. And you can also contact me on LinkedIn. I
All
have a
right.
pretty large presence on LinkedIn, so you can just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I have a calendar on there, and if you're interested, I'm absolutely happy to connect. And we're also the kind of firm that we also have lots of relationships with other firms. So, and with other people out there. And so if you're looking for something that we can help make those connections, we're happy to do that as well.
All right. And the name to on for your LinkedIn is straight Pamela Murphy, not anything in front or the back.
You literally could look me up, Pamela Murphy. If you type in Pamela Murphy MSW, um,
Uh-huh.
I probably am the only MSW up there, and I'm specific about putting my degree up there because of the reasoning. Because I'm one of the few social workers
Right.
who have led government relations functions, and so I think that's important. People don't always think of social workers as policy people, so I think it's important to put us
Right.
out there, put that social work
Exactly.
professionals out there like that.
All right. Want to
Yeah.
thank you for coming, Pamela. Appreciate your time with Sync Podcast. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers and business owners or people that are either in tech or striving to get their government relations footprint out there can definitely find this video useful. So thank you, Pamela, for your time. We appreciate it, and we look forward to interacting with you probably soon and another time.
Thank you